profoundly deaf. My father was also born profoundly deaf, but my mother wasn't. She became deaf at the age of 5 as a result of meningitis. My father comes from Castlewellan in County Down, and my mother comes from Armagh. This story is about my father and goes back to when he was 8 years of age. My father had been sent to St Joseph's School for Deaf Boys in Dublin. He was the firstborn in the family and had a sister, Mary, who was hearing. At the time, his mother was expecting her third child, and sadly, she died in labour with this baby. She was only 32, and a few hours after giving birth to the baby son, he died as well. My grandfather was bereft and did not know what to do, and decided to place my father in this school at St Joseph's. He never got home. Even at holidays, Christmas time, etc., he had to remain. All the other boys went home to their families during the holidays, but he never did. Another person told me that he used to run away all the time, but my father never told me this. Perhaps he was embarrassed. I can understand why he ran away, because the Christian brothers drove a hard bargain in terms of chores and labour, coupled with the fact that he never got home. Poor Dad never had a relationship with his father. He continued at school, and when he was 16, a Christian brother told him he would be starting a new job, flying airplanes. Oh, he was so excited. He could hardly contain himself. The job was in Limerick, and he couldn't wait. They caught the train, and when they arrived at the station, there was a man and a woman waiting for them. They struck up a conversation, and Daddy was looking all around, taking in all the sights, as he had no way to know what they were talking about. When they finished, the Christian brother wished my father luck and bid him farewell, and set about returning back to Dublin. My father was relieved to be leaving school behind and beginning a new chapter in his life. He got in the car with these strange people, and they drove for a long time over an expanse of farmland, hill and dale, with lots of cows, horses, sheep, etc. After a long journey, they finally arrived at this place. My father was quite bewildered, and the man beckoned him into a building. It was a cow shed. He told him it was his job to milk the cows. My father was in disbelief, as he'd been led to believe he would be working with airplanes. The stark truth was he had been deceived, and what he had to do in reality was sit and milk cows all the time. Bearing in mind, it was all done manually, as there was no such equipment to milk the cows back then. The man spared no mercy, and he was forced to work constantly, despite his hands and wrists aching. Sometimes my father would only milk the cow half, as he could see their distress and knew they needed out. But when the farmer caught him not working as he wanted, he beat him up. Dad was defenceless and had to throw the treatment dished out by the farmer. This continued right up until my father was 25 years old. 9 long years for a pittance of wages, 25 pence. Dad was still wearing the clothes he arrived in from school, and all he had was the bag he brought with him. He had an extremely long beard, and he was in threadbare rags, but he endured. He never got anything for himself like a break or be able to attend church. Even if he was sick, there was no care or slack cut It was a constant regime every single day. During this extreme sufferance, he secretly prepared himself to escape. In all this time, he had been taught no skills. One day he went to the house and knocked the door. When the woman opened it, he asked if he could borrow some money, and she said no, and slammed the door shut. He was bitterly disappointed, but after a couple of days the woman called him over. This gave him a glimmer of hope, so he finished up what he was doing, and he went over. She did indeed hand him some money. He thanked her and went back to where he slept, and that night gathered up all the money he had in the world. At supper, he put some food into a bag, claiming he was full and would keep the rest for later. This was all part of his master plan to get away from this hellhole. He waited until everyone was in bed and checked he had everything that he had foraged. Crept out and grabbed a bike from the yard and started to cycle away from the farm. He cycled all the way back over the hills and dales until he arrived at Limerick train station. He used the money he had and bought a ticket and caught the train to Dublin. After he had abandoned the bicycle, he was ecstatic to eventually be free. When he arrived in Dublin, he wanted to travel on to Belfast, and again using the money he had tried to buy a ticket, but he hadn't enough money to pay for it. My father was distressed and couldn't believe what was happening. He hadn't eaten or anything, and it must have been the state he was in and his reaction. Somehow or other they let him go through, and he made his way to the Belfast train. He got on the fast train and landed in Belfast. He was full of anticipation, but didn't know how he was going to communicate. He wrote a note and started to ask some people if they knew where the Deaf Club was. Every person he approached shunned him, obviously because of the state he was in, unkempt and smelly, with a long beard and hair. Unfailing, he persisted. And then a lady gestured an affirmation and waved him to come to her. They walked together through the streets, and she pointed to a building. He went in. It was the Deaf Club, and in an instant he recognised a man, then another one and another. They were his friends from school. They couldn't take in his state or how this had happened, but they told him they would take care of him. That was in Bread Street, where the old club used to be. The building isn't there anymore. A deaf woman took him with her, and they wanted to know the backstory and how this had come to be. Father was starving, so they gave him some food and told him he should have a bath and loaned him some clothes to wear. They cut his long hair and beard. Once my father recounted what had happened, they were so proud of him for escaping. After a few days' recuperation, he started to look for a job. He asked around and got work as a window cleaner, working with John Carberry. John was a younger man than my father. They did their first job, and then the next, and when the time came, Dad got his pay. It was £5, which was a fortune compared to the measly 25p from the farmer. He was in heaven. That was his first job in Belfast for a few years, and then his life moved on from there.